You ever walk into a room and feel every eye on you, judging, sizing you up, already deciding you don't belong? That's how it was for Lena Hawkins the day she stepped into the training yard at Camp Grayson, a military academy out in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, where the sun scorches your soul and the dust sticks to your boots like regret. The whole place buzzed with laughter when Colonel Tom Brennan, a grizzled old war dog with a voice like gravel, called her up for a sparring match. Lena, this quiet, wiry woman who looked like she'd wandered in from a community college poetry class, not a soldier built for combat. I'm telling you, the guys in that yard, all muscle, buzz cuts, and bravado, they didn't just laugh, they howled, like they'd never seen anything funnier than Lena standing there in her crisp fatigues, hands clasped behind her back, eyes locked on some distant point nobody else could see. She didn't flinch, didn't crack a smile, just stood there, taking it all in, like a desert rock soaking up a rare rain. But there was something about her, something in the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes flickered with this quiet fire, like lightning waiting to strike. And let me tell you, one guy in that yard wasn't laughing. General Marcus Reed, a man who'd seen more classified ops than most of us will ever read about, stood at the front, his weathered face unreadable, watching Lena like he knew something the rest of us didn't. See, Camp Grayson was the kind of place where you proved yourself or you broke, no in between. It was all about tradition, about who could shout the loudest, hit the hardest, carry the heaviest load. And Lena? She didn't fit the mold. Too small, too soft-spoken, too clean, you know? Like she belonged behind a desk, not out here in the dirt with the rest of us. Brennan, with his chest full of medals and his ego bigger than the Grand Canyon, saw her as a walking challenge to everything he stood for. "What's this, Reed?" he called out, smirking, his voice cutting through the chuckles like a knife. "We recruiting librarians now." The yard lost it again, nervous laughs, some genuine, some just following the pack. But Lena? She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, her hands still clasped, her face calm as a still lake. If you looked close, though, you'd see it, that flicker in her eyes, that storm brewing under the surface. And on her wrist, just peeking out from her sleeve, there was this tattoo, faint, jagged lines, like map coordinates, gone before you could be sure you saw it. Now, I'm not saying Lena was some superhero waiting to unveil her cape, but there was something about her that didn't add up. She wasn't here to play games or impress anybody, you could tell that much. She was here for something bigger, something heavier, like she was carrying a weight nobody else could see. And General Reed? He knew it. You could see it in the way he watched her, his eyes narrowing like he was trying to piece together a puzzle from a mission he'd buried years ago. He had clearance that went straight to the Pentagon's deepest vaults, the kind of access that lets you know who's really who behind the code names. And Lena Hawkins? She wasn't just some rookie. Let me take you back a bit. Lena grew up in the wide-open plains of Nebraska, where the sky stretches forever and the only thing louder than the wind is your own thoughts. Her dad was a Vietnam vet, a quiet man who'd sit on the porch at night, spinning stories about courage and loss, always clutching this old brass pocket watch he swore kept him alive through the jungle. That watch was Lena's inheritance when he passed, not just a keepsake, but a reminder to find your way, no matter how lost you feel. She enlisted at 19, chasing that same sense of duty, that same need to prove something to herself, to her dad's memory. But her file? It's got holes. Whole chunks of her service record marked classified, locked behind clearances even Brennan's connections couldn't touch. Medical records, too restricted, like someone didn't want anybody digging too deep. That watch she carried? It wasn't just sentimental. There was something inside it, something that could have turned Camp Grayson upside down if anybody had bothered to look. Brennan, though, he didn't care about any of that. To him, Lena was a test, a chance to prove the old way still ruled, that strength was about muscle and grit, not whatever quiet game she was playing. He'd built his career on that belief, clawing his way up from a nobody grunt to a decorated colonel, all scars and swagger. He thought he was protecting the military's soul by pushing her, by making her prove she could handle the heat. What he didn't know was that someone was watching him, someone with the power to end his career with a single email. Reed wasn't just the camp commander. He was a ghost in the system, a man who'd flown black ops in places we don't talk about. And Lena? She was starting to feel like a memory he couldn't shake. Things got real personal when Brennan's son, Ethan, showed up for family day. You could feel the tension from across the yard. Ethan, a lanky kid with his dad's sharp jaw, but none of his hardness, walking up to Brennan like he was crossing a minefield. "Dad," he said, voice low. "You look pissed, same as always." Brennan's face went tight, his shoulders squared like he was facing an enemy, not his own kid. "This is my world, Ethan," he snapped. "You wouldn't get it." Ethan's eyes dropped, hurt but not surprised. "I get enough. I get why Mom walked out. Why I haven't called you in years." It was raw, like a wound ripped open, and nobody in that yard dared breathe too loud. Reed, standing off to the side, caught every word, his face darkening like a storm rolling in. And Lena? She saw it all, her eyes scanning the scene like she was reading a battlefield, picking up on pain most people would miss. Brennan didn't let up after that. If anything, he doubled down. Like Lena was the punching bag for every frustration he carried: his kid, his ex-wife, his own doubts. He set her up for every brutal drill he could dream up, from hand-to-hand sparring to late-night runs in full gear. But Lena took it all, never complaining, never breaking, just moving through it with this eerie calm that started to unnerve people. At night, though, it was different. She'd slip into the bathroom, gripping the sink, her breath shallow, like she was fighting ghosts nobody else could see. The sound of a chopper overhead could send her spiraling, her hands shaking as she tried to ground herself, to separate memory from reality. Someone was watching her, though someone who knew what those signs meant, who'd seen them in soldiers who'd been through hell and come back changed. The real test came during a close-quarters combat drill in the camp's mock urban setup, a maze of concrete walls and rusted steel, designed to mimic a war zone. Brennan rigged it, of course. He briefed the opposing team, 8 guys, all handpicked to go after Lena hard, to overwhelm her with numbers and aggression. They were using simunition, those paint rounds that sting like hell but don't kill you, and Brennan made sure they'd come at her like a tidal wave. He watched from the observation deck, arms crossed, waiting for her to crack. But then something happened. Lena moved, and I mean moved like she'd been born for this. Her steps were precise, her aim steady, clearing corners like she'd done it 1,000 times under real fire. She used cover like it was part of her body, her M4 carbine an extension of her will. The guys coming at her? They didn't stand a chance. One by one, she picked them off, her movements so fluid it was almost scary, like watching a predator in a nature documentary. Brennan's smirk faded fast. Reed, standing nearby, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as pieces of a long-buried puzzle started clicking into place. You ever see someone reveal who they really are when the pressure's on? That's what happened that day. But Brennan wasn't done. He wanted to break her, to prove she didn't belong. So he set up one final test, a live-fire exercise in an old aircraft hangar on the edge of camp. He called it a stress scenario, but it was sabotage, plain and simple. He gave Lena's team faulty radios, the kind that cut out when you need them most. The opposing team's weapons? A mix of training rounds and live ammo, just enough to make things unpredictable. Worst of all, he swapped out the smoke grenades for ones that burned too hot, too fast. His logic was cold. If Lena was the real deal, she'd handle it. If not, she'd wash out. Simple. Except it wasn't. The exercise started fine, controlled chaos, like always. But then the smoke grenades went off, and the hangar turned into a nightmare. The insulation caught fire, flames licking up the walls, the air thick with toxic smoke. Cadets were coughing, panicking, trapped in a maze of heat and screams. Brennan watched from the observation deck, his face going white as he realized he'd screwed up bad. Reed was already moving, his satellite phone out, barking orders to someone high up, someone who could pull strings most people didn't even know existed. And Lena? She didn't hesitate. She reached for that brass watch, not to check the time, but like it was her anchor. Then she moved, and it was like watching a switch flip. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp, commanding, no room for doubt. "Stay low. Follow my lead," she shouted, her eyes scanning the smoke like she could see through it. She identified exits nobody else had noticed, barking orders with a precision that felt unnatural, like she'd done this before, in places darker than a training hangar. She grabbed a coughing cadet, hauled him over her shoulder, and moved through the flames, her watch glinting in the firelight. One by one, she got them out: 12 people, some half-conscious, all alive. She was the last one out, carrying a kid who'd passed out from the smoke, her face smeared with soot, but her eyes clear as day. Outside, black SUVs were already pulling up, government plates, men in suits moving fast to cordon off the area. Reed was there, his phone still in hand, his face pale but focused. He looked at Lena, and something clicked. "You're Shadow 4, he said, so quiet it was almost a whisper, but it hit the air like a bomb. Shadow 4. A code name tied to a mission so classified it didn't exist, a mission where everyone was supposed to have died. Brennan, standing nearby, froze, his world tilting. See, Shadow 4 was a ghost story in Spec Ops, circles the lone survivor of a black op that saved thousands but cost everything. Lena was supposed to be dead, her name erased, her file buried. Reed stepped closer, his voice heavy with years of guilt. "I was your chopper pilot, Lena," he said. "I pulled you out of that hellhole in Kandahar. Been watching you ever since, making sure you were safe, hoping you'd step into the light one day." The yard went silent, every cadet, every officer, just staring. Lena's tattoo, those coordinates, they weren't random. They marked the spot where her team had fallen, where she'd walked away with intel that stopped a catastrophe. Brennan's whole world came crashing down. He'd spent weeks tearing into Lena, thinking he was weeding out weakness, when she'd already proven herself in ways he'd never come close to. The irony was brutal. He tried to speak, but Lena cut him off, not with anger, but with something sharper. "You thought you were testing me, Colonel," she said, her voice steady, eyes locked on his. "But all you did was show me who you are." It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but it landed like a gut punch. The aftermath was messy. Reed's phone call had pulled strings, big ones. Lena's file was partially declassified, just enough to shut down any doubt about who she was. Brennan faced a review board, his career hanging by a thread. But Lena? She didn't gloat, didn't settle scores. Instead, she sat down with the camp's leadership and laid out a plan: new protocols to stop harassment, trauma-informed training, a culture where strength wasn't about who you could break, but who you could lift up. They made her a special advisor, and she started mentoring cadets, sharing her story not to boast, but to teach. One night, Reed called her into his office, a room lined with maps and photos from ops nobody talked about. "Lena," he said, his voice heavy, "your mission didn't fail. You saved thousands of lives. Your team, they knew what they were doing when they got you out." It hit her like a freight train. All those years, she'd carried the guilt, thinking she'd let them down. Now she knew the truth. They'd chosen her to carry the mission home. She didn't cry, not Lena, but you could see it in her eyes, the weight lifting, the ghosts finally resting. A few weeks later, she stood at the camp's memorial wall, her dad's watch in her hand. She placed it there, right where every cadet would see it. Inside, a faded photo of her team, smiling in some desert outpost, frozen in time. It wasn't just a keepsake anymore, it was a beacon, a reminder that true north isn't a place, it's a choice. Camp Grayson changed after that. Lena's ideas took root, and the place started to feel less like a gauntlet and more like a proving ground for real leadership. Brennan, humbled, started counseling sessions, even patched things up with Ethan, thanks to Lena's quiet nudge to face his own mistakes. And Lena? She walked the base every morning, nodding at cadets who now saluted her not out of fear, but respect. Her voice, once too soft for the old guard, carried a new kind of authority, the kind you earn by doing what's right, no matter who's watching. So here's the thing. Where are you standing when you see someone like Lena? Are you laughing with the crowd, judging what you don't understand? Or are you the one who sees the storm behind the calm, the strength in the silence? I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Tell me what you think. Have you ever been underestimated like Lena? Or maybe you've been the one judging too quick. What's the real cost of assuming you know someone's story? Share it. Let's talk, because stories like this, they don't just change a person. They change everything.